This is the beginning of The Big Lie, Part 3. Missing links. Speaking of ancestors, evolutionists tell us that man descended from monkeys. If this is the case, then the fossil record would produce ample evidence that this were so. This is perhaps the most obvious flaw in the theory of evolution. If evolution is true, then the fossil record would produce fossils linking one group of life form to another. You could call these omissions in the fossil record missing links. Paleontologists refer to them as transitional forms. A paleontologist is a person that studies fossils. According to the general theory of evolution, the progression of life leading to man happened in the following manner. Non-living matter evolved into living life forms called protozoans. Protozoans evolved into metazoan invertebrates, which in turn became reptiles. Here the reptiles split into two groups. One group developed wings and feathers to become birds. The other group developed fur and became four-legged mammals. The four-legged mammals finally stood up on two legs and became apes, and then from that unlikely ancestor evolved man. If the scenario is true, well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. If this scenario is true, then the fossil record will support it. The fossil record is, after all, unbiased and impartial to any theory of origins. Fact is, of the 10 progressive life forms just mentioned, not one single transitional form existed between any two of them. If fish slowly evolved into amphibians over millions of years, then there would be ample fossil evidence of what you might call fishibians. Couldn't we expect a few transitional fossils between reptiles and the birds, or between reptiles and fur-bearing animals? If life forms have evolved slowly over eons of time, as the evolutionists insist, then the fossil record should be sprinkled without overwhelming evidence to this effect. It isn't. There is not one single transitional form to be found anywhere in the world, not one. There are no missing links. Do the research and check me out. Even the father of evolution himself, Charles Darwin, admitted that there was a flaw in his theory. He wrote, "As by this theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in the crust of the earth? Why is all the nature not in confusion instead of being, as we see them, well-defined species?" Geological research does not yield the infinitely many fine gradations between past and present species required by the theory. And this is the most obvious of the main objections that may be argued against it. The explanation lies, however, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. Charles Darwin was honest enough to admit there was a flaw in his theory of evolution, and he also recognized that there were no missing links to be found in the geologic record. He was mistaken, however, when he tried to blame this lack of missing links on the extreme imperfection of the geological record. The geological record is perfectly complete. It contains examples of every kind of life form that ever existed, except the missing links. When the term missing link is mentioned, we get a mental picture of ape men, those non-existent beings that keep popping up in our textbooks and magazines. There are even lifelike displays in museums around the world portraying ape men in their supposed natural habitat. I've seen that in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. These fanciful portrayals are not based on fact because there is not one single shred of evidence linking man's ancestors to apes. Let's look at some of the evidence that the ape-man concept is based upon. In Dayton, Tennessee, 1925, the outcome of the famous Scopes evolution trial convinced the nation that the Bible is wrong. God did create man in his image. The prosecution attorneys introduced a panel of great scientific experts that described the recent discovery of a link between ape and man, which they call the Nebraska Man. This man, they argued, proved conclusively that man was not a created being as the Bible declared, but rather the result of evolution, the ape being one of his ancestors. The defending attorney, Williams Jennings Bryan, wanted time to examine the evidence, but was ridiculed for challenging the so-called experts. After all, what could he know? What was their evidence for this missing link? A tooth. A single tooth and nothing more. The scientists of the world examined this tooth and determined that it was the tooth from a prehistoric man, which they concluded was man's missing link. Years later, the rest of the skeleton of Nebraska Man was found, and it turned out Nebraska Man was not a man at all, but an extinct species of pig. The expert scientists had created a species of man from the tooth of a pig. Another famous missing link is the Java Man. In 1891, a fervent evolutionist named Dr. Eugene Dubois discovered 3 molar teeth, a piece of bone from the left thigh, and a small piece from the top of the skull. From this fragmentary evidence of unpetrified bones, Dr. Dubois tried to convince the scientific community, for a while anyway, that these were the remains of a prehistoric man that lived 750,000 years ago. The scientific community did not go for that one. When pressed about the details concerning his find, Dr. Dubois admitted that the bones were found over a period of several years in an area of 70 square feet, which was in a dry riverbed that contains the remains of other animal fragments as well. Dr. Dubois later reversed his original opinion, stating instead that the remains probably belonged to a gibbon ape. Although neither the original discoverer nor the scientific community would call these remains a missing link, the evolutionists still cling to this bit of evidence and the Java ape man is still to be found in museum displays, textbooks, and magazines. Another missing link emerged in 1912 when an amateur fossilologist found some bones, teeth, and primitive implements in the gravel pit at Piltdown, Sussex, England. He took them to an eminent paleontologist at the British Museum. The remains were acclaimed by anthropologists to be 500,000 years old. It was considered to be a great find. Over 500 doctoral dissertations were performed on this missing link, which they called Piltdown Man. In 1956, using a new dating method based upon fluoride absorption, the Piltdown bones were found to be a hoax. The jawbone actually belonged to an ape that had died only 50 years earlier. Upon closer examination, the teeth were found to be filed down, and the bones had been colored with chemicals to hide their true identity. Cancel another missing link. Finally, I will conclude with the Neanderthal man, which was discovered in a Neanderthal valley near Dusseldorf, Germany, at the turn of the 20th century. Everyone has heard of him and seen artists' misconceptions of him in books, films, and even TV advertisements. He is portrayed as being semi-erect, barrel-chested, and having a brutish face. He is supposed to represent man's most recent ancestral link. Since that original discovery, other Neanderthal skeletons have been found, and it is now known that the Neanderthal man was fully erect and fully human. The old misconceptions concerning his physical stature: the skeleton of the first Neanderthal man was found to have had osteoarthritis and rickets, causing him to have a hunched back and bow legs, which made him resemble an ape. The second factor was the bias of the pre-programmed evolutionary anthropologist. In conclusion, what is the significance of all of this? Simply stated, man has no missing links. There are no transitional forms linking any of the life groups. The theory of evolution is a fictitious hoax. It is the atheist's answer to the dilemma of origins because they cannot come to grips with the only alternative, which is found in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. As I mentioned earlier, one of the building stones that make up the foundation of our faith is the creation account as found in the Bible. Your faith will never amount to anything unless you come to the conclusion that God really is capable of, and in fact did create all things. Let me put it another way. How can you have faith in God's ability to heal if you do not believe that He can create life? How can you pray for God to help you out of some of life's circumstances if you believe in evolution, which teaches that our circumstances are the result of random chance events? Since the theory of evolution literally denies the existence of God, how can a Christian believe in both evolution and God at the same time? One contradicts the other. I will conclude with these words, which the New Testament found in 1 Timothy 6:20 and Colossians 2:8. Turn away from godless chatter and the opposing ideas of what is falsely called knowledge, which some have professed, and in so doing have wandered from the faith. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on the human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than Christ. This is the conclusion to the big lie.